The UFC is almost 30 years old, and over the years we have been introduced to some legendary fighters. However, given how huge the promotion has become over the last few years, the guys from the early days are unfortunately running the risk of becoming the sport's forgotten men. Today, we are discussing 8 forgotten UFC legends and what they're up to these days. So stay right where you are. Let's get straight into it then. First up, it's Tito Ortiz. Ortiz is a bona fide legend of the game and held the UFC's light heavyweight title for 3 years during the early part of the 21st century. Tito won the title from Vanderlei Silva and went on to defend it an impressive 5 times before losing it to Randy Couture in 2003. However, he would stay in the game for another 16 years and only retired from MMA in 2019 at the age of 44. Since then, he has tried his hand at professional boxing, but unfortunately suffered a heavy knockout defeat at the hands of another former UFC champion last year, the legendary Anderson Silva. He also ran for office shortly after hanging up the MMA gloves and was actually sworn into the Huntington Beach City Council on November 2020. However, his tenure in local government wouldn't last long, as he would resign on June 1st, 2021. He is also the CEO of Punishment Athletics MMA equipment and clothing line based out of Huntington Beach. Where does Tito rank in the all-time greats list for you? Next up, it's Randy Couture, a true pioneer of the game. Couture first experienced life in the UFC as far back as UFC 13 in 1997, and would win both the light heavyweight and heavyweight titles on 2 separate occasions. He would also beat a who's who of legitimate killers during his career, and was known for epic fights against the likes of Vitor Belfort and Chuck Liddell. Since retiring back in 2011, Couture has pursued a career in acting and has appeared in movies such as the Expendables franchise, as well as Hawaii Five-0 and The Hard Way. He has also lent his MMA expertise to the PFL, where he can be found behind the analyst desk for the promotion. Of course, like any good former champion, Randy is still active around the gym and is the co-founder and head coach of Extreme Couture in Vegas, home to current MMA champions such as Francis Ngannou, UFC, Ryan Bader, Bellator, and Vinny Magalhaes, M1, as well as a whole host of other former champs. Matt Hughes is coming through now. Hughes is a 2-time former UFC welterweight champion and is widely regarded as one of the greatest MMA practitioners of all time. He won his first title by knocking out Carl Snooten via way of slam, before submitting many people's GOAT, Georges St. Pierre, to win his title back after losing it to BJ Penn. Since leaving the sport in September 2011, it's safe to say Matt has lived a pretty colorful life. He has been involved in multiple TV programs, including Trophy Hunters TV, a hunting program on the Outdoor Channel, which he still hosts today, as well as a couple of MMA-related shows. In June 2017, Hughes was almost killed after his car was involved in a collision with a train at a rail crossing in Illinois. He would later sue Norfolk Southern Railway and some of its employees, who he claimed were at fault for the accident. Who is the greatest welterweight in UFC history, in your opinion? We are talking Mark Kerr now. Stay tuned. Kerr appeared in the UFC in the very early days and was the winner of 2 heavyweight tournaments. He is probably more synonymous with his time in Pride, however, but he can still be considered a pioneer of the game. Kerr would retire in 2009 after winning just 4 of his 15 fights since the turn of the century, but wouldn't fully commit to it at the time, suggesting he was 99.9% retired. He hasn't fought since, thankfully, and has gone on to pursue a degree. Since 2015, Kerr has been employed at a Toyota dealership where by all accounts he is flourishing. The subject of HBO's 2003 documentary, The Smashing Machine, Kerr would later suffer with peripheral neuropathy, a condition which was no doubt brought on from years spent in the cage. He was reportedly forced to start a GoFundMe page to help pay for his treatment, which is pretty sad. There have also been rumors in the past few years that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is interested in playing Kerr in a potential Mark Kerr biopic. What do you guys make of Kerr? And now, it's Mark Coleman. The Hammer is another legend of the game and won the first UFC tournament he ever took part in, UFC 10, which also happened to be his MMA debut back in 1996. He was also the first ever incumbent of the UFC heavyweight title after unifying it with a win over UFC Superfight champ Dan Severn. Coleman would retire in 2010 with a record of 16-10 after defeat to Randy Couture, but since then, it has been a bit of a rocky road for Mark. In 2020, he revealed he had been one of the victims of Dr. Richard Strauss, the University of Ohio physician who spent 2 decades abusing his patients. He also suffered a heart attack in late 2020 and had to undergo emergency surgery to save his life. As well as attending rehab for a drinking problem, he is now thankfully sober. Do you guys think there should be more safeguarding policies in place to protect fighters once they retire? Let us know below. Next up, it's Don Frye. Stay with us. After a career as a below-average boxer, Frye decided to try his hand at MMA and will go down as one of the sport's first ever stars. Making his MMA debut at UFC 8, Frye would go on to fight some of the game's earliest stars, such as Gary Goodridge and Tank Abbott, whilst also losing via TKO to our old mate Mark Coleman. Frye retired from the sport back in 2011 at the age of 45, and since then has been involved in acting. He has appeared in plenty of movies, including Miami Vice, Public Enemies, and Noah, whilst also making a guest appearance on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia as a wrestling opponent back in 2009. He also briefly returned to pro wrestling in 2013 after turning out for New Japan Pro Wrestling during the early part of his career. Give us your thoughts on Don Frye below. Pat Miletich is coming through next. Miletich was famed for his submission skills during his career, finishing 16 of his 29 wins by forcing his opponent to tap. He was vastly experienced when he made his UFC debut at UFC 29 and would finish his spell with the top MMA promotion with a record of 2-2. Since calling time on his career, Miletich has had his finger in many pies. He has been involved in combat training for law enforcement and also teaches defensive tactics courses. He has also provided MMA commentary for ESPN in the past, but was forced to step down from his role after being involved in the January 6th Capitol riots in DC in 2021. Miletich is also a successful trainer and founded Miletich Fighting Systems after retiring. The gym has provided 11 MMA world champions, as well as almost 100 fighters who have appeared in a televised fight. Former UFC champions such as Robbie Lawler, Jens Pulver, Tim Sylvia, and Matt Hughes have all called MFS home at one point or another, proving that Pat Miletich is a fighting man through and through. What do you guys make of Pat? Give us your thoughts below. And finally, it's Royce Gracie. Stick around. There's no one more synonymous with the early days of MMA than Brazilian legend Royce Gracie. From the world-renowned Gracie Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu family, Royce was the first man to explain that BJJ would allow a smaller man to beat a bigger man. Of course, his claims were rubbished in the build-up to UFC 1, but after submitting Art Jimerson, Ken Shamrock, and Gerard Gordeau all on the same night, the martial arts world began to sit up and take notice of Mr. Gracie. Of course, Royce is still involved in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to this day, and the Gracie family conveyor belt keeps pumping out world-class BJJ practitioners. Royce is still a hands-on trainer and travels the world attending BJJ seminars and taking part in interviews with websites and TV shows in order to promote the martial art. And it's safe to say, he has probably reached his goal. BJJ is now regarded as probably the most important skill in MMA, meaning Royce Gracie has been vindicated thousands of times over since those early claims that BJJ trumps all. He has also opened his own affiliate schools with locations in more than 30 countries worldwide. What did you make of Royce's early UFC footage? As usual, thanks for stopping by today, and remember to tune in again next time for some more fun in games. And why not do us a big favor by liking today's video, whilst also sharing it with any UFC fans you know of. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Bye guys!